Good evening, everybody, and well, certainly good evening here in County Durham, up in the northeast of England. And I'll take this opportunity, the next 40 minutes or so, to really give you an overview of the work that I've been doing up here in Durham, and to put it into some sort of context as well, really. And so, with the help of some archaeological, some cartographic, textual, and topographical evidence, I'm going to suggest reasons why the objects that I found up here in Durham were either deliberately deposited, are they waste disposal, or were they dropped. So being based in Durham City, it's pretty far north, but not that far north that we have we're frozen out all year round. The rivers do run clear 9 or 10 months of the year. So I live, work and play in this city here. This is a pretty special photograph. I do like this one. It captures the Durham Peninsula in all its glory, I guess. So what you're looking at there is pretty much our stunning World Heritage Site. Right in the middle, you may make out Durham Cathedral. Just behind that is the castle. The River Wear forms this big loop that effectively creates this fortress that almost as if it's a moat, and it would have contributed to keeping out the Scots for quite a while, I guess. My story sort of starts way back in April 2007 when I, rather than go diving on the Farne Islands or St. Abbs up in the northeast coast, where typically we would go diving, I made a decision to have a look, go and investigate in the River Wear in Durham, just to have a look, see what it was like. And it was quite a cold early April morning, if I recall. And on that very first dive that we did, I was joined by my brother Trevor, and we'd both been diving for 20 odd years, so we're really well experienced. So to dive in a relatively slow moving river that wasn't really deep as well, wasn't really going to present us with too many challenges. Just before I move on to the next slide, I just want to highlight a couple of things. In the sort of bottom left hand corner, you've got quite a large prominent bridge. That's Preben's Bridge, a late 18th century structure. And then on the peninsula itself, you might just make out on the Bailey, on the South Bailey, little white house, that little white building. And I'll come back to that in a few moments. So if you're all sort of familiar with that aerial view of Durham, you might instantly recognize this map. This is the oldest surviving map that we have of Durham City. And it captures the city way back in sort of 1595. So this is an illustration by Christopher Schweiter, and it's taken from Matthew Patterson's map. And in many ways, nothing has changed at all. The peninsula is exactly in the same place. Obviously, you can see the castle and the cathedral. You can see the River Wear forming that loop around and creating the peninsula. And over to the east, you have the bridge I paid a particular attention to, which is Elva Bridge, crosses the river. To the west, you had what's Durham's oldest bridge, and that's Framwellgate Bridge. And down at the bottom corner is Preben's Bridge. Way back in the sort of 15th, 16th century, it was a wooden structure. And all of the bridges in Durham were prone to floodwater. They were sort of on an annual basis, they were getting damaged and needed to be rebuilt. An area I'm really, really interested in is this sort of triangle of buildings over to the right-hand side, over to the east. And that's an area known as the New Borough of Elvis. And those tenements, those houses that you can sort of see that create these nice roads, the footprints of those buildings remained in situ right the way through to the 21st century. So I'll come back to the Borough of New Elvis later on. So on that very first dive that Trevor and I did in the River Wear, we sort of stumbled upon some treasure. We didn't, at first we didn't know what it was. It was gold and silver objects that came out of the river. And very quickly we were able to identify that the objects themselves belonged to Arthur Michael Ramsay, who happened to be the 100th Archbishop of Canterbury. And he held that role from 1961 to 1974. But he was a man who had this long association with Durham City. In 1942, he was actually a canon at Durham Cathedral. He married his wife Joan the same year, He became Bishop of Durham in 1952 and Archbishop of York in 1956. He oversaw the creation of the General Synod, and in 1953 he was one of the 10 gentlemen at arms at the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II. So importantly, when he stepped down from his role of being Archbishop of Canterbury, the bishop decided to come back with his wife Joan to Durham. And that White House that I showed you on the peninsula, on the aerial photograph, is actually where he ended up spending his final years in Durham, just 200 meters away from Prebends Bridge. So an opinion formed in our minds at an early stage that surely Bishop Ramsay's house had been burgled, and if there was one object, if there was objects in the river, surely there was more. And what we did, we went back, and over the very next day, we found quite a lot of other objects. To cut a long story short, we declared these objects that we found and to Durham Cathedral, who were the obvious landowners at this stretch. We entered into an agreement with Durham Cathedral whereby we were essentially asked to undertake a full underwater survey of the riverbed with a view to finding anything else that we could associate with Bishop Ramsay, and that's what we did. I guess some of the anomalies of the Bishop Ramsay's treasure is that they were found in small clusters divided by type. For example, all of the Vatican objects were in a small pile on the riverbed. Objects associated with the Greek Orthodox Church were at another section of the bridge. The Russian objects were elsewhere. So it's as if the objects themselves have been deliberately thrown in almost discreetly, so that they ended up relatively close together on the riverbed. While we were excavating and looking for the Bishop Ramsay treasures, I came across this this coin. So if you can imagine, we were sort of wafting away the soft shingle in the sand, going down 5 or 6 inches, and we discovered the Bishop Ramsay objects. We did find many hundreds of Queen Victoria period bunhead pennies, but on one particular dive, I must have been about 2 foot down in the sand, and I came across this coin here, and it's a Dutch East India Company 1 Deutsch, not a significantly important coin. It tells us a little bit about trade, which is of great interest, but for me what was really important was the date, 1793, because that was meant that the coin itself was minted just a handful of years after the construction of Prebends Bridge. And if I was finding objects as old as Prebends, what might I find if I investigated elsewhere, for example at Elvet or Framwellgate bridges, which were both 12th century? So while researching the other bridges, I came across this wonderful watercolour by Louise Ingram Rayner. She's one of Britain's most admired topographical artists. And if you don't recognise this, what you are looking at is the bottom end of New Elvet Bridge. So, and we think that this watercolour was painted in probably around 1886. And for me, it's just a stunning piece of artwork. It really brings the area to life. It had a prevalence of and no attention had ever been paid to the comfort or convenience of the inhabitants of those dismal tenements. So the bridge itself was 12th century construction, built by Bishop Hugh de Plessis. And shortly after it was built, it was badly damaged by floodwater, and at great expense it had to be rebuilt. Now the bishops granted charters that allowed the building of tenements on the bridge, and that counts for that cluster that you can see there on that picture. And in the foreground, actually, there's some really weathered over that sort of the arch that's on the right, there's some really weathered sandstone, and that marks the spot of St. Andrew's Chapel. It's long since gone. It was built in 1280, but it collapsed in 1769. But you can just imagine that, given that pilgrims en route to St. Cuthbert's Shrine, just 300 meters away, may have paused at that chapel en route. And I'll come back to that later on. This is the oldest painting that we have of Elbert Bridge, and we think this is 17th century. It's by an unknown artist, but it's significant for two reasons. Firstly, on the right-hand side, you get sight of the tenements, the long, narrow riverside tenements with workshops and space out the back for craftsmen to do their trade. If there's quite a large river wall that historically has always seems to have been there to keep at bay the floodwater, and you can see gates built into the wall and also a ramp. So it was an important location. If you were a craftsman or a merchant engaged in an occupation that required access to the river water, this is the prime location where you needed to be. Another reason this painting is important is that you get sight of Elbert Bridge, and you have these sort of little recesses actually on the bridge. So directly above the cutwaters, you go all the way up, you have these little triangular recesses that aren't there today. They've gone, but they were locations where vendors and peddlers rented out little booths and bothies and stalls. And just imagine that, given that this is a really narrow bridge, only about 18 feet wide, and tens of thousands of people would have crossed that bridge every week, maybe every month. It would have been a prime retail and an ideal location to sell your wares to the passing trade. So Elbert is a location where I ended up diving for the last 10 years. So 2019 marked season 10. I haven't dived in 2020 for obvious reasons, but it's a location. So pretty much where I am there on that picture is a section of the riverbed that I've been excavating for quite a long time now. So just hope you can hear me talking there. I'll just turn the volume down. I'll turn it back up. Reduce that down. So the fact that we do live in the north of England means that when you're underwater in the river for up to 2 hours with a 15-litre cylinder, it can get incredibly cold. So I always just use a dry suit for that reason. It's pretty much full kit. The 15-litre cylinder will give me about 1 hour 45, 1 hour 50 minutes underwater. The depth I'm diving at is literally only 2.5 meters deep, so you've got no obvious dangers. The biggest danger is being struck by one of the rowing boats that come hurtling past that spot. So I do need all of the kit with me. What I'm going to do now is literally show you, show you some underwater footage of me on the trench. So the riverbed at Durham is solid sandstone. It's a sandstone bedrock that just explains the reason why they built the bridge where they did. There was really solid rock, which meant they could put the foundations down. But over thousands and thousands of years, the sandstone has, the fast-flowing river has created channels in the sandstone, and these little gullies have ended up becoming traps. So what you're looking at there, I'm actually on a trench, and on the right-hand side, you might make out solid sandstone, and then at the bottom, it's sort of flat sandstone. And obviously, nothing can go beneath any deeper than sandstone. But above that, we have these stratified layers. The objects are in a type of context. And in this little video clip, I've got my eyes. I've spotted an object just protruding out of the side of the water, the gravel. But just above that object is this sort of dark earth layer, and that's full of these archaeological these objects, even cloth, textile survives. I'm just going to pull the object out here. Here it comes. Nice little object. I'll be delighted if anybody actually knows what these are. Just let it run its course, this video. Let's just bring it up. So there you go. So on any given dive, I'm finding objects as easy as that, which is great news. And that particular object is this one. It's a sort of a post-medieval bodkin. There's an illustration of it on the right. It's very simply made of copper, very thin copper sheet, folded over in half and actually held together by a little brass rivet, which just pops through there. The function of bodkins changed through time. Quite often they were worn in a lady's hair, and it was a hairpiece, quite often decorated with pearls. Quite often they were silver. But this particular one is an identical copy there in a Dutch master's painting of a bodkin just tucked in there. Perhaps given its rectangular eyelet, it was used to thread lace or ribbon on a young lady's dress, I guess. So the objects of it just keep coming out of the riverbed in abundance, and I can't explain how many. I can't really explain how many hundreds I find on it. Nobody seems to believe how many I find on any given dive. So what I'm going to do now is just show you the types of artifacts I've been recovering from that one spot at Elvers for the last 10 years. So the objects themselves, we call it the Durham River Weir assemblage. In many ways, these are the small things forgotten. The Department of Archaeology at the University of Durham have described it as a major research facility. It's probably the largest collection of late and post-medieval finds in the north of England. It's a unique regional and national resource. So hopefully you agree with me that the objects themselves, the level of preservation is quite stunning. And that has to be linked to the fact that they come from this typically a meter beneath the riverbed in this anaerobic layer where there's virtually no oxygen down there. And that's helped with the preservation of the textiles and leather, bone, other objects like that as well. So the assemblage contains both English and imported continental artifacts, showing how the trade of northern England linked up with the rest of the country. In many ways, they represent a record of the wider economic, social, and manufacturing changes seen in the city evolving from medieval to the modern period, and as a continuation of human lives and associated activities. One of the incredible things of the assemblage is that nowhere in Durham's extensive written records, and we do have incredible textual records in Durham, are these small objects ever referred to? And there really are, quote James Deeks, the small things forgotten, or perhaps even the tiny things forgotten in this case. So after I've been recovering these objects for a couple of years, I won't go into any great detail here. However, I got an opportunity to link up with the Department of Archaeology and was introduced to a gentleman called Dr. Chris Capel, who is a senior lecturer and conservator in the Department of Archaeology. Chris set up, we had a meeting set up, and we came to an agreement whereby I loaned the Department of Archaeology these small objects, and their students, who were undertaking an MA in the Conservation of Museum and Archaeological Artifacts module, were each given one as part of their coursework. So they had to sort of produce this quite extensive 3,000-word research report. And that actually is something that continues right the way through to this day. So we have this wonderful resources, these incredible work done by the students on these small artifacts. Chris sort of recognized my enthusiasm and passion for these objects, and as a mature student, I was asked to go back into the department, or go back into university, into higher education, initially to get a degree, which would get me onto an MA program, but eventually, in the bottom right, you might just make me there. In 2017, I graduated with a Master of Philosophy, and that has positioned me now. So where I am, my role now is to coordinate the wider research on the assemblage. I still continue to do my own research, but we need to reach out to other experts to help us, because we literally have so many objects. So just to give you a feel for some of the other types of small finds that come out of the river, this is a lovely little hat pin, twisted brass That's all it is. All of those three component parts are brass, even the little brass ball that's in there. Apparently its function was to hold a hat, to keep a hat on one's head. And unparalleled, as far as we know, we can't find a similar one. And this is going to be sort of early post-medieval period. These are just some of the buttons that we have found. We've got over 380 buttons. The vast majority are these solid cast Tudor style buttons with an integral shank. It's very rare do we find matching buttons, but the vast majority of these are tin, lead, tin, pewter, and copper alloy buttons that's in there as well. These are just some of the 400 buckles that we have, and the buckles themselves typically range from like the buttons themselves as well, actually range from the 12th century right the way through to the sort of modern period. And there's a wide range of different types, specialized type of buckles, suggesting obviously different uses for them. These objects I'm quite interested in. I've done a lot of research on this. Hopefully you'll recognize the three across the top, and they are lead spindle walls. These three are decorated. I think we've got about 42 spindle walls of this type. The two bone objects standing vertically over to the left are bone pin beaters. So if you were a weaver residing in a tenement that was down in the new borough of Elvet, and you were sitting in front of your loom and you had your warp and weft thread, in order to push down that the weft thread, you would use a bone pin just to push it down to get a really good tight bolt of cloth when you finish there. Before that, you even got to that stage, the iron spikes that you see on the bottom right hand side, they are wool and flax comb spikes as well. So if you had your raw wool, ideally you would want to get all of the fibers in some sort of line before you attach it to a distaff and then spun the yarn, using the spindles that you can see there. You would use these woolen flax comb spikes to do just that. And the four objects sort of in the middle, the small discs, they are lead cloth seals. So these four are two-part lead cloth seals. This is a particular one. So each of the cloth seals were contain a privy mark or a ligature or a royal device. So if you look at this top left-hand side, you can see sort of a ligature, an A and an R in there. And quite often people would mistake this as being Anne Rex, but this is a much earlier 17th century one. I did my thesis on the lead cloth seals, and I had an opportunity to extract, we made a decision to extract surviving textile from three case studies, three seals, and that is the exact textile that came out of this seal. So you can see both sides of it there. We put forward a really good rationale. Why should we do that? Because the knowledge the information are valuable. We work at warp thread, the thread count. There's a raft. It was actually a wolf. No flax survived at all. With these textiles that we extracted, I got an opportunity to go up to the Centre for Textile Conservation and Technical Art History at Glasgow University. And we think, I'm pretty sure, for the first time in England, we successfully extracted, identified colorants related to dyes from textile, from these textile fragments. So that was really, really sort of proud moment for me. This particular textile has a Noack type A component in, and that was a characteristic component of redwoods. And redwoods, in this case, were imported during the 17th century from were ported into Europe from the 16th century onwards, sort of from the Americas and Central America. So the information that we can gain from just from the textiles is incredible. Each of the lead cloth seals is, if you're familiar with them, you know exactly what I mean. So the privy marks, the royal devices, the ligatures, the information that is contained on these cloth seals really does help us identify when they were used and typically where they were manufactured, where their provenance is. And in their provenance, by that I mean the location in which they were first attached to the cloth themselves. So in England, the cloth seals themselves were linked to the trade, industrial regulation and taxation of commercially produced cloth. Alnage officials would affix a lead seal to a cloth to ensure that the alnage and subsidy had been paid, and that was typically 4p per broadcloth. If you see the cloth seal on the right with a large capital A, and on the other side is a pine cone device. Now, the pine cone device is a heraldic device for the city of Augsburg in southern Germany, a location that was over 900 miles away from Durham, and that was once attached to fustian cloth, and that probably came into Durham right during the sort of, would have been about 1620 period when that one. So based on information on the cloth seals, this is a nice little example. It's got a little two-part lead cloth seal here. You might just make out some vertical lettering on there, but when we look at the illustration of the cloth seal, you make out an L, an I, an L, an L, and that is an E, suggesting that it comes from Lille. And it is worth noting that there's 328 lead cloth seals that have been found in Durham, and that makes it the largest collection of lead cloth seals available for analysis outside of London. And as you can just imagine how important that is. So each of these little dots that you can see on this map is a location where the cloth seals have come from that we've been able to identify in some pretty distinctive clusters. So in North Yorkshire, in this area here, York, Leeds, Wakefield, Halifax and Manchester, that's the sort of late worsted manufacturing during the 18th and 19th century. There's cloth seals from Norwich, and they are all dated to the 17th century, and they were once attached to worsted cloth as well. So dated to that 17th century period. We've got broadcloths and kerseys from Wiltshire and Devon. We've got London cloths that are typically being dyed by the London Dyes Company and shipped up the northeast coast to Durham. Over in Europe, we've got from Haarlem and Leiden cloth seals that were once attached to very fine linens. But this cluster here, Malines, Ypres, Tournai, Lille, Douai, Arras, and even Rouen, they are incredibly important in the history of Durham because the cloth seals from those areas, from those important textile production centres, were attached to cloth during the 14th and 15th century. And in Durham's, in the Bursar's accounts of Durham's monastery, the records tell us that fine luxury woolens were being procured during that period, during that late medieval period, but we never knew where from. But now we can say with some authority that the cloth itself was being shipped down the rivers, down the river network to one of the large ports, and then over the channel to London and then up to Durham. So it's incredible new evidence of trade and obviously social status as well, and for people to be able to afford luxury woolen cloths during that period. This is quite a special ring. It's the Anne Stewart mourning ring. The inscription around the ribbon says Anne Stewart obit October 1775, age 35. So it's a very poignant 22 karat gold ring. It has a rock crystal front, and it's made even more poignant by the fact that filaments of Anne's hair survive trapped between the rock crystal in the bezel there. This is quite a nice armorial seal matrix. The inscription in Latin reads, the seal of Jonas die Insula, and incredibly, an identical device to this survives on a parchment, on a indenture in Durham Cathedral's special collections, dated 1325. So it's a wonderful link that to make that association. These are objects associated with trade. Large lead wool weight in the top left-hand corner. You might make out a lion. Pass on right. There is his tail and his head. This is probably a wool weight, but it's only weighs, I think it's £1, this one, so it's quite light for a wool weight. The objects top right are jeton, which are counting tokens or reckoning tokens, and typically is a mid-16th century Nuremberg jeton type. And the row of objects across the bottom are all coin weights, and we've got pretty much every English coin, gold, nobles, and angel series represented in the collection. But we also have coin weights from all over Europe. The square cloth coin weight in the bottom left-hand corner was used to measure the weight of a Hungarian ducat, and that's St. Ladislas there. You may just make out with a halberd in the bottom. It's an Antwerp coin weight with the initials of K and I, who was the maker. These objects are obviously tools, and in that painting that I showed you earlier on, where we had sight of those riverside tenements, and those are ideal locations for craftsmen, workshops to be situated. And there's a huge amount of leatherworking tools that come out of the river, as well as objects associated with stonemasons, timber joiners, and pretty much everybody, to be honest. These are strange looking objects at the bottom are casting waste. So the manufacture of lead, pewter, copper, gold and silver objects was taking place down there. The syringe may well have belonged to a barber surgeon, and this one was used to treat urinary infections or sexually transmitted diseases. We've tested, we've got this one's being researched, and there's evidence of mercury inside the syringe. These objects are incredibly important. They are obviously pilgrim badges. The 3 ampulla across the top are firsts for Durham. Nobody's actually found pilgrim's ampulla in the city before. Incredibly rare north of York. The pectoral cross in the bottom right-hand corner is incredibly similar to St. Cuthbert's 7th century Anglo-Saxon golden cross. You might just make out little rectangular shaped cell work in there. That's typical of that Anglo-Saxon golden cross in their period. This is unparalleled. There's no other evidence of pilgrimage to the shrine of St. Cuthbert anywhere, and this may well be a first. You might just make out a W there with a crown above it on the ampulla, and that may well be from Our Lady of Walsingham. And this little round medallion at the bottom, you've got a sort of a saintly figure holding a staff there, and the inscription reads S. Augustine, Saint Augustine, another unparalleled object. So the question about the pilgrim badges is, why have they all been found in the river? Does it add to the theory of deliberate disposition of pilgrim badges into a watery context for purely superstitious reasons? The find spot is equidistant between St. Andrew's Chapel and the middle of the bridge. So were pilgrims pausing and throwing these objects into the river for purely superstitious reasons? So the assemblage now, we continue to work with the students at Durham University to get them as many as we can researched. In the University of Archaeology on Palace Green, we have about 400 objects on display, and I know work is ongoing for next year for a much more a greater exhibition of these objects. And I mean, how fantastic as an end result to have no objects researched and conserved in the Department of Archaeology and then put on display in the local museum. That for me is worth its weight in gold. The students are currently creating an online digital exhibition, which is just ongoing the last 3 or 4 months. We've got a Christmas break coming up, and then hopefully we launch in the spring this brand new online digital exhibition of dozens and dozens more of these small finds. So the assemblage itself is pretty much the trench that been excavating has come to an end. There will be more objects down there without a shadow of doubt. But what we'll try to do is just share the knowledge, share the excitement of these objects. We've created a website, diveintoDurham.uk, and our mission now is to continue the research in our surviving in our archives up in Durham. We continue to photograph as many objects as we can, and the illustrations is something that just never goes away. We continue to illustrate the object, and then of course the analysis, and the students are going to continue to do that. But we do need other experts from around the UK who may be interested in a particular group of objects to step forward and help us out, really. If you're passionate about, it might be buttons or buckles or pins, if it's something you're really interested in and you would like to get involved, by all means get in touch, and we really appreciate you doing that. And that's it, ladies and gentlemen, the whistle-stop tour of the Dive into Durham assemblage of small finds.